Welcome to 28 Days and Beyond,
the show where we talk about our history, our heritage, and our culture.
I'm Amari.
I'm Charisma. Hello.
What's up?
How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. And yourself?
I'm good.
Okay. Let me ask you a question.
That felt really, really aggressive.
Oh, yeah, because I'm ready to jump into this one.
Well, let's try.
So, you know, on this show, 6 seasons now, we've often discussed community empowerment, community development. And I think one of the things that I'm always interested in, I personally am always interested in, is what is a grassroots plan or a grassroots approach to community empowerment? A lot of times people talk about the importance of voting, elected officials, policy, but I personally believe that people have a lot more power over our lives than we are led to believe and that we often believe ourselves.
In terms of what?
Or just ability to make change. Here's something I've said before. I know this is not a popular sentiment, but I was always struck in the era of the first Obama election.
Yes.
By how many people were galvanized to get him into office, right? It was an amazing sight.
Everybody.
I mean, it was, and I remember thinking at the time, like, if we would apply this energy to our own communities, we would see the change that we were looking to him to implement.
And I think a lot of people thought that that's what they were doing by getting behind him. Do you know what I'm saying? I think for a lot of people, and maybe it goes back to the conversation where, you know, people talk about the structure of companies and work, right? You say, you know, there has to be a boss, they're employees. So not everybody is meant to necessarily be on the forefront of those changes. So sometimes they look to other people that are in positions of power or that have more of a voice or a platform in their minds. I'm not saying for me to be the people to kind of step outside in the front.
I mean, that makes me think of what they call messianic leadership. That there's always one leader who kind of directs the ship or, you know, the path that we're going to pursue. What I think is really interesting, though, over the past, say, 20 years, we've really seen what they call horizontal organizations or, you know, more democratic organizations where there is no one leader, but that decisions are made collectively.
Which I like better.
But I think there's also some problems or some challenges that come along with that. And that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Awesome.
We're joined by our friend, Dr. Ajima Olaghere, who is a professor of criminal justice at Temple University. And we'll be jumping into this and much more when we come back on 28 Days and Beyond. Welcome back to 28 Days and Beyond. We're joined now by our friend, Dr. Ajima Olaghere.
Yay!
What's up?
Good to be here.
Thank you for coming back.
Thank you for
It's
having
good to
me.
have you. You know, our conversation last year garnered a good response. We knew we had to bring you back.
Yes.
I'm glad.
And today we're talking about, well, let me ask you, because I asked the tough questions.
Yes, he does.
Right? What to you is the path to community empowerment?
The path to community empowerment is local and very specific. So not this abstract concept, not a single individual, not something at a high level. What I mean by local, I mean it's just right there in our communities, whether it's our household or street block, or an organization you belong to, but it's something very specific to that person and their surroundings, their routines. And in terms of it being specific, it's task-oriented. So for some communities, empowerment could be something related to, we're going to remodel or do a vegetable garden, or we're going to try to petition to open up a new recreation center. For some people, it could just be something very task-oriented to, I just want to get to know my neighbors. And the reason why I like framing it that way is that it makes it doable for every single person.
Right.
And to your point, I think that's what happens a lot, and that's a little bit what Amari and I were talking about in the first segment. But I think a lot of times when people hear the words empowerment, it is this abstract idea for them where they think it's so much bigger than just starting with themselves and the people that are their neighbors or people that are around them.
It can even be intimidating to think about it. Like, that's a daunting thing to do. And so, like, community empowerment, community organizer, like, that could be a job in and of itself. But, and I think it can be in a lot of ways, but I think that takes away from this whole idea of living in a democracy and having a voice, that we each play a role in sort of the destinies and the outcomes we want to see. And we don't necessarily have to abdicate that to other people, particularly our elected representatives, right? We still have a role to play.
But I think what's interesting about the way you just phrased that was you say we live in a democracy and people associate democracy with the electoral process.
Right.
That's not what you're talking about necessarily.
Right, no. So
Yeah.
the electoral process, you know, obviously we have this representative constitutional democracy that sort of lays out how we the people are going to elect people to govern us, right? To build our society and to move us forward into the future. But that doesn't mean we step away and we just sort of go back to our lives and just assume that everything's going to be okay. We still have a role to play in making sure that the effects of what we see happening to us is in line with what we think is appropriate for us locally and is specific to our routines as a community. And that's going to vary community by community. And so I think when we talk about community empowerment at the highest level, I think that's something that we're trying to cultivate, you know, nationally, even globally. But I think for those of us that need to be connected to it, we need to think of it in different terms. And realize that at the end of the day, particularly, you know, this being Black History Month, and you think back to the Civil Rights Movement, like that was perhaps the best example of that abstract example of community empowerment, but that started at a very, very local level, right?
Very
And a lot of the
grassroots.
history we don't even have like fully documented, right? And I think what you'll become to realize as you go through those histories that it's very simple things. It's like, you know, just writing a list of people that you know that you can get together with and have a conversation like we're doing right now. In some sense, this show, our conversation, is a form of community, is a form of empowerment because we're talking and we're learning and we're doing something very specific to our community here.
That was a lot to process.
She's
she
a good
like
doctor.
she has these intellectual like bombs and then she just drops them
them
and she
ever
goes,
so, ever
"Here
so
you go.
slightly. But
Here
I
you
think
go."
one of the things that's really sticking out on what you're saying is what comes to mind. This is like a bite-sized sort of thing. When we say community empowerment or community development, we're thinking about, you know, organizing a mass rally when it is as simple as a community is a group of people, right, working together. So it could be just as simple as saying, you know, we're going to organize in Philly to go for block parties, right? We're going to organize a block party, or we're going to, you know, have a potluck or a community meeting, right? Those are the
Even
simple
the
things.
vegetable garden, like putting good food back into communities, like that's not a small task.
Yeah. So when we come back from the break, I'd really like to talk about the recent developments of organizational models, right? So we all talk about organizations. We began to talk about more horizontal organizations, some of their strengths and potential challenges when we come back on 28 Days and Beyond.
Welcome back to 28 Days and Beyond. We are still here with Dr. Ajima. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about some of those organization models because Amari mentioned, and we also talked a little bit about democracy and what that looks like. So can you talk about what it looks like really to have these different models of organization as far as getting the community to a place where we can empower each other?
I think for me, when you think like models, for me that imposes like a very formal framework on the community. And I think often realize, and that sort of takes it back to the abstract concept. So I think a way in which to work is sort of think organically, like in terms of some people are already doing the work of working horizontally. In a lot of ways you do need to bridge, you know, that these abstract concepts with what happens organically and locally so that you can begin to see that sort of that aggregated and sort of expansion of community empowerment. I think a horizontal model or different sort of models of organizing are crucial, particularly when you think about if you're going to do something political, if you're going to do something that's going to require cultural change, climate change, a lot of the change that we do want to see in communities across different spaces, it's incredibly helpful because it's hard work, it requires self-care, and it requires delegating, and it requires realizing that you can't get everyone on board. There's going to be some communities that are going to say, like, you know what, this is not what I need to be about right now, or I can't be a part of it for a variety of reasons because I just don't have the time, for example. So I think different ways of organizing has to start with just relationships. And when those relationships become complex, then you sort of impose these organizational models of, I like the idea of a horizontal framework because in some sense we're all level, we're all on the equal playing field, right? And I think that sort of reinforces the notion of the organic relationships, that I'm not over you or you're not beneath me, right? We all had a sort of like a cooperative effort here, as opposed to in a hierarchical model. It sort of gets back to this whole notion of democracy, right? We're representative government, we vote for people that are above us in some way, and we have a president and so forth, and that sort of by default can inspire just that deference and lack of questioning and lack of sort of like, I still have a role to play versus sort of a flat structure like we all have a part in this. We all have a seat at the table.
And I think, and that's why I think one of the biggest challenges becomes we are products of a cultural grooming.
Yeah.
Which says you look to position from the time
Yeah.
we're children. There are positions of authority. There are hierarchies that we have to respect and abide by. So then when it comes to someone saying, "Oh, I can actually stand up and do something for myself," right? Say, "Well, actually, who do I have to talk to get permission to clean up my block, right? To pick up the trash on my street? Who do I?" You see what I'm saying? So then it becomes difficult to enter into a different paradigmatic relationship if you are not prepared to operate that way. You understand what I'm saying?
Right. But I think there's some beauty in that, because I think being unprepared allows for questions, and asking questions helps you move further away from that lack of preparation, or that black box of what am I doing. So for example, if I don't know, who do I go to do a trash pickup? I just start asking questions.
Or you just start picking up the trash.
And I start doing that as well.
Right.
But also, you also maybe just say, "Oh, well, I don't know," so, right? Because that's what I'm saying.
that
I think there is
happens
the fact that you have to also feel a sense of empowerment to ask questions.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Which is associated, I don't want to ask because it makes it seem like I'm stupid or what. You see what I'm saying? Like all of that factors into it as well. And I'm saying this specifically because, like, you know, we saw Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter. We see all of these things, and people are saying, no, there are no leaders. But it became obvious to me, observing those movements, that we're actually conditioned to always try to identify who the leaders are. Just say, "Oh, what do you mean there's no leader? Who's going to do the interview? Oh, the person doing the interview must be the leader because they're speaking up for the," right? You see what I'm saying? And furthermore, I actually think that is how the power structure affirms its power base, by forcing you into their model.
Absolutely.
You see what I'm saying? But
yeah. Now I'm stumped here, because I think the point you bring up completely, it's almost as if there are preconditions to community empowerment, whether that's local and specific or this abstract concept. And it takes me to a place where you begin to think about I think of the Matrix all the time, right? How do
Red pill, blue pill.
exactly, red pill, blue pill,
There
or
is
just
no
or just unplug and then just have some sense of like awakening and begin to ask questions. Go from, I'm not going to pick up the litter, or I'm not, or even thinking about, or just tolerating it, to the state of asking questions.
There is never enough time with you on this couch. But thank you so much for coming. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We got to get you to come back season 7. Anytime. That's all. Right. So we can finish. We'll be back with more 28 Days and Beyond right after this.
And we're back with 28 Days and Beyond. Charisma.
Yes.
Yes.
We love Dr. Ajima.
Oh, we definitely do. I mean, she's always just bringing, precision of knowledge, wisdom, and insight that I think, this is a big conversation. I think one of the things I really valued was it doesn't begin with that level of complexity. It's really just as simple as making sure that you are saying hi to the people around you, that you're making, building some form
that
of
is
relationship.
What community is
at the base, exactly.
One of the things you said stuck out to me too, because as Dr. Ajima was saying, a lot of times we look outside to see about people making decisions or helping us do the things that we are fully capable of doing ourselves. But I've not personally experienced, because the way I was raised to question things. If I had questions, I was always able to ask my parents questions about things. If I didn't agree with something, I was able to ask respectfully, of course.
Right.
And it wasn't this thing where it was like anyone that's in a position of authority can say or do whatever, and you just take
have it be
it.
unquestioned, right? Exactly.
But a lot of people were raised that way, where it's like anyone that's in a position of authority or anyone that's out there has more power than you do. So I think a lot of it too, as it pertains to empowering our community, is getting out of that mindset of them and really reflecting on self and what you're able to do, and just start there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a sort of personal motto of my own, is like, when I find myself feeling frustrated or angry, I'm saying, have I done everything within my power to change my situation?
Right.
And until I have, I can't complain. You know what I mean? And I think that also applies to people saying we want to take control over the, communities in which we live.
Right.
Whether it be as simple as, down to, you know, like you know, she talked about a vegetable garden.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking about when I was a child, my first protest was they wanted to build an incinerator in our neighborhood, and where I grew up, the environmental racism, the black people were on the fringe of town between the prison, the turnpike exit, and now they were going to have an incinerator. And, you know, they were very deceitful with how they did it. They sent out a survey, which had some confusing language. And the community came out when they said they were going to build this,
And they were
this,
like,
this
"No,
incinerator.
we're
And they were
not
like, no, we're
having
not.
it."
Of course it didn't, you know, they
Well.
still built it and it's still going. But the point is that it was, people were able to organize themselves. That's a first step.
And
being
take a
able to,
stance.
and take a stand. And then,
Yeah.
you know, you can build on that relationship. So I definitely think that community development, community empowerment is something that is possible. We just need to slightly shift our lens on
Yes.
how we're thinking about it.
I agree.
Yeah. But this has been another episode of 28 Days and Beyond.
Where we talk about our history, our heritage, and our culture. We'll see you next time.
Peace.